Check her apron.
To-
That watch is worth more than you make in a year. So let's just handle this right now.
They didn't yell it. That's the part nobody talks about. They whispered it. Quiet enough that only the people close by could hear, but loud enough, just loud enough, that it traveled. Check her apron. 3 words, and I felt the whole room move. I was mid-sentence taking an order, pen to notepad, smile locked in place, 5 years of muscle memory holding me together. And then, just like that, I was no longer a person. I was a problem. I didn't explode. I didn't cry. I didn't do the thing they were clearly waiting for me to do. I went still. Because here's what you need to understand before I tell you the rest of this story. I had been still before. I had been accused before. Not with words like that. Not in a room full of people watching over crystal glasses and linen napkins. But I knew the feeling. That specific weight. The moment a room full of strangers decides what you are before you've said a single word in your own defense. What I didn't know, what none of them knew, was that a man in the back of that room was already watching. Not to help me. At least, that's what I thought. And what happened next, what I did next, took me 8 months, 2 allies, 1 recording device, and a gala full of powerful people to pull off. Stay with me. Because this story starts with humiliation, and it ends with something else entirely. My manager told me to stay quiet before the night even started. Not in a mean way. That's the thing about Mr. Preston. He never said anything mean. He had this careful, his rehearsed way of talking to the staff that always sounded reasonable right up until you realized what he was actually saying. He pulled me aside near the service corridor around 6:30, clipboard pressed to his chest like a shield. He said, "Tonight's going to be a full house, high-profile guests. Let's just keep things smooth, okay, Zora? No friction." No friction. I nodded. Said yes. Straightened my apron and went back to work. But I knew what he meant. I had always known. In a place like the Maison Noire, no friction had a very specific translation. It meant, don't make them uncomfortable. Don't take up too much space. Don't let anyone have a reason to notice you in a way that causes a scene. In other words, be invisible, but be excellent at the same time. I had been doing exactly that for 5 years. But the dining room that night was everything the Maison Noire was built to be. White linen, candlelight bouncing off crystal, a low hum of conversation between people who moved through the world like it owed them something. I knew most of the regulars by now. Table 4 was a retired judge who always ordered the same thing and never once looked me in the eye. Table 9 was a woman I recognized from the local news, always on her phone, always gracious, always overtipped. And Table 12? Table 12 was Raymond Holt. I knew him the way you know a storm. Not because he announced himself loudly, but because the room shifted when he walked in. Staff moved differently. Managers smiled harder. Even the other guests seemed to recalibrate slightly in his direction. He was a city councilman, silver-haired, well-dressed, the kind of man who had never been told no by anyone who mattered. He had a regular table, a standing reservation, and a particular way of looking at the waitstaff. Not quite disdain, but something just beneath it. Like we were part of the furniture. Functional, replaceable. I took his table that night because my colleague Deja had called in sick. Everything was routine. His usual order, his usual barely there acknowledgement. I moved on. I was at table 7, mid-order, pen moving, when I heard it. Check her apron. Not a shout, not even a full sentence with accusation behind it. Just 3 words, dropped into the air like they were nothing. But in a room that quiet, they landed everywhere. I froze. My pen stopped moving. My breath caught somewhere between my chest and my throat. Ma'am, and I felt the worst thing I have ever felt in that dining room. I felt every single eye in the place turn toward me. The guest at table 7 looked away, uncomfortable. The couple behind me went silent. I turned around slowly, Holt was standing now. His watch, apparently, was gone, and he was pointing at me with the full confidence of a man who had never once been wrong in public. "That watch is worth more than you make in a year," he said. "So let's just handle this right now." My mouth opened. I said, "Sir, I didn't—" He cut me off before I finished the sentence. "And Mr. Preston?" He was already moving toward us, already nodding, already deciding in real time that Holt's comfort was worth more than my dignity. Two security guards appeared from somewhere behind me. I felt my hands go cold, and I knew what was about to happen. I had seen it happen to other people. I just never thought I would be standing inside it. And right then, right in that exact moment, a voice came from the back of the room. Calm, cold, absolute. "Stop!" I turned, and everything changed. Before I tell you who that voice belonged to, let me ask you something. Have you ever been in a room full of people and felt completely alone? Have you ever known with everything in you that you did nothing wrong and still felt like the walls were closing in anyway? If you have, this story is for you. Hit subscribe right now, not because it helps a channel, but because what happens next, what I chose to do after that night, is the part they never tell you about. The part that took patience, intelligence, and a kind of quiet that most people would have broken long before I did. Stay. Because this is just the beginning. The man who said stop owned the building. His name was Kang Soo-hyun. And the moment Mr. Preston said his name, the moment I watched a room full of powerful people go completely still, I understood something very quickly. I had been working inside someone else's world all along, and I had no idea how deep that world went. The footage cleared me. That part you need to know. A man in a tailored suit, not a guest anyone recognized, not staff, had slipped past Holt's table while I was across the room. The watch disappeared in less than a second. 3 monitors, 2 camera angles. Undeniable. Holt had gone pale. Mr. Preston had gone paler. Mr. Kang had said quietly, and into the silence, "She is owed more than an apology." And then he offered me the floor manager position on the spot. You'd think that was the moment things got better. It wasn't. The morning I came back in my new role, the kitchen went quiet when I walked through. Not the good kind of quiet, the uncomfortable kind. The kind that means people are rearranging their faces before you see them. Deja, my colleague, one of the few people in that building I actually trusted, pulled me aside near the linen storage. She said, real soft, "They're saying you slept your way into this." I didn't react. Not because I wasn't furious. I was furious. I was so furious I could feel it sitting in my chest like something hot and heavy that had no way out. Yes, but I had learned something standing in that dining room the night before. The moment you react, you lose. The moment your face breaks, the moment your voice cracks, you become the story instead of the truth. And I was not going to become the story. So I thanked Deja, kept my face smooth, went to my new office, barely larger than a supply closet, and sat down. And I started paying attention. Because here's what being a waitress for 5 years in a place like the Maison Noire teaches you. Nobody notices the person refilling your water glass. Nobody lowers their voice when the waitstaff walks by. Nobody thinks twice about what they say in front of the help. And in 5 years, I had heard things. Fragments. Half conversations. Names mentioned too casually in places where names like that shouldn't be casually mentioned. But I hadn't understood what I was hearing at the time. But I was starting to. Because something wasn't right about the way Holt had come after me. A man like that, with his connections, his reputation, his polished cruelty, didn't accuse a waitress of stealing a watch over a watch. He had a reason. He needed me gone. And the question I kept turning over, sitting in that tiny office with the noise of the dining room just on the other side of the door, was this. What had I seen? What had I heard, without even knowing I heard it, that made me dangerous to a man like Raymond Holt? I didn't have the answer yet, but I was going to find it, and nobody in that building was going to see me looking. Then he walked back into the restaurant on a Tuesday, same silver hair, same tailored jacket, same table, table 12, like nothing had happened, like he hadn't stood up in front of a full dining room and tried to take everything from me with 3 words. Raymond Holt sat down, shook out his napkin, and picked up the menu, and I was the one who walked over to greet him. Not because I had to. I had a full-floor staff now. I could have sent anyone. But I chose to go myself because I needed to see something. I needed to see if he would flinch. He didn't. He looked up at me, and for just a half second, something moved across his face. Not guilt. Something colder than that. Calculation. Like he was trying to figure out what I knew, what I felt, what I might do. I smiled. Warm, professional, completely unreadable. "Good evening, Mr. Holt. Your usual table. Can I start you with still water?" He blinked, looked back down at his menu. "Fine," he said. I wrote it down and walked away. And I felt his eyes on my back the whole way. Good. Let him wonder. That same week, I had a conversation with Keisha that changed everything. Keisha had been a housekeeper at the Maison Noire for 8 years. She knew every floor, every supply closet, every guest preference logged in the system. She also knew things that were never logged anywhere. She found me in the break room on a Wednesday morning, poured herself a coffee, and sat across from me like we were just 2 women catching up. She said real quiet, "The man who took the watch. Somebody set that up. He was here 3 days before it happened." I kept my face still. What do you mean?" "He stayed in one of the rooms upstairs. Not under his own name. Not in the system the way regular guests are. He was brought in through a different booking. Private." I set my mug down slowly. "Who handles private bookings?" Keisha looked at me for a long moment. "That's the part you need to sit with," she said. She left it there. I sat with it all day. By that evening, I had started a journal. Not on my phone, not anywhere digital. A plain black notebook I bought from the pharmacy 2 blocks away. I wrote down everything I knew, everything I suspected, and everything Keisha had just told me. And then I wrote down the thing that had been quietly forming in the back of my mind since the night I stood in front of those monitors and watched the truth play out on 3 screens. The watch was never the point. The setup, the public accusation, the security guards, the crowd of witnesses, none of that was about a watch. Somebody needed me removed from this building in a way that would stick, not fired quietly, discredited, gone in a way that nobody would ask questions about. That meant I had seen something, or heard something, and I didn't even know what it was yet. But somebody believed I was dangerous enough to destroy, which meant one thing: I was. I just needed to figure out what I was holding, before they figured out that I didn't actually know I was holding it. I kept showing up every day, smiling, managing the floor, and I kept that notebook close. 6 weeks in, I found his name by accident. I wasn't even looking for it. I was reviewing service logs from the previous month, part of my new role, cross-checking staffing patterns against complaint records, when I noticed a discrepancy. A private dining room on the 2nd floor had been booked 3 times in the past 2 months. All 3 bookings were listed under a shell name, a company name I didn't recognize. Short stay, minimal staff assigned, no food orders placed through the regular kitchen system. That last part stopped me. If you book a private dining room at the Maison Noire and you don't order through our kitchen, what exactly are you doing in there? I wrote the company name in my notebook, spent my lunch break searching it on my phone from a coffee shop 2 streets away, not from anything connected to the hotel's network. Then the company didn't have a website. It had a registration address, a building I recognized. A building on a street where 2 city council offices were located. The name attached to the filing was not Raymond Holt. It was a woman named Elena Park. I sat with that for a moment, turned it over, wrote her name down beneath the company name, drew a line between them, and drew another line back to the hotel. Then I went to see Mr. Kong. "I want to be clear about something," By this point, I had spent 3 weeks trying to figure out exactly what Kang Soo-hyun was. Because the man who had stepped out of the back of that dining room and stopped everything with a single word, he wasn't just a businessman. The way the staff reacted to his name, the way Mr. Preston's entire body language collapsed when Kang walked in, the quiet efficiency with which everything had been handled afterward. There were words people used about him, careful words, words that got said quickly and then moved past. I wasn't naive, but I also knew this. He had stepped in when nobody else did, and since then, he had given me a floor, an office, and access, more access than a manager typically had, without asking me for a single thing in return. That was either generosity or strategy. I had decided to treat it as both. I knocked on his office door that evening after the last guests had cleared. He looked up from his desk. I sat down without being invited, opened my notebook to the page, and slid it across to him. Did you know Raymond Holt has a stake in this property through a company registered under Elena Park's name? He went very still. Not the still of someone hearing new information, the still of someone recalibrating how much someone else already knows. He looked at the notebook, then at me. Where did you get this? Service logs, I said, and a public registration filing. A long pause. Elena Park is my former attorney, he said. I didn't react, just waited. He looked at me for a long time after that, like he was making a decision he hadn't planned to make tonight. Finally, he said, "What do you want in return for this?" I had thought about this answer for 3 days. I knew exactly what I was going to say. Access to everything you're willing to share, and time. He looked at the notebook one more time, then he nodded, and I felt something shift, not in the room, but in me. The balance of this whole thing had just changed. As I wasn't a waitress who had been wronged anymore. I was someone with a file. Let me stop here for a second, because I need you to understand something. At this point in the story, I had no legal team, no connections, no money to hire anyone. What I had was a notebook, a housekeeper who trusted me, and 5 years of being invisible in a room full of people who talked too freely. You know what hurts the most? Not that they came after me. It's that they thought I wouldn't notice. They thought the woman refilling their water glass wasn't paying attention. If you've ever been underestimated by someone who should have known better, this channel is for you. Subscribe right now. Because what I did next took everything I had, and what they did back, that's where this story gets dangerous. Mr. Kang gave me access to the hotel's internal communication logs under the cover of a routine security audit tied to my management role. Nobody questioned it. That was the thing I kept learning. When you are the new floor manager doing her job, nobody looks twice. Nobody assumes the woman with the clipboard and the professional smile is building a case. They just move around you the same way they always did. Invisible, but excellent. I spent 3 evenings going through those logs at my desk after close, the restaurant quiet around me, the cleaning crew the only sound on the other side of the door. And piece by piece, the picture came together. Raymond Holt wasn't working alone. There was a real estate developer named Marcus Webb, Holt's college friend, as according to a social profile I found, who appeared in the private booking records 3 times in the past 4 months. His connection to the shell company was 1 layer deeper than Elena Park's name, but it was there if you knew where to look. There was a deputy district attorney named Carl Briggs, who had shared a dinner with Holt in one of those private rooms 6 weeks before my incident. I had served that dinner. I remembered it because Briggs had sent back his steak twice and never once said thank you. I wrote all of it down. And then I found the thing that tied it together. Kang's hotel property sat on a block that had been quietly flagged for a city development corridor, a rezoning project that, if approved, would make the land worth 3 times its current value. And the development contract tied to that corridor had not yet been awarded. But according to a city planning document that was technically public but buried deep in a municipal archive I found at 11 o'clock on a Thursday night, Raymond Holt was on the committee reviewing the proposals. He needed Kang's property, or at minimum, He needed Kang destabilized enough that the sale could be forced or negotiated from weakness. Getting rid of me was step one. Create a scandal around the hotel, rattle the management, give the city grounds to open a license review, turn up the pressure until Kang had no choice but to sell quietly and walk away. They had used me as a tool, a disposable one. I sat with that for a long time, not because it broke me. I was past the point of breaking, but because it meant the night in the dining room, the humiliation. At the security guards, the whole carefully staged production of it had never been about a watch. It had been about real estate. I had almost had my entire life dismantled over a property deal I didn't even know existed. I went home that night and sat in my apartment for an hour without turning on the lights. Then I made a list. Raymond Holt, Elena Park, Marcus Webb, Carl Briggs. 4 names, 4 connections, 1 goal, and right now, every single one of them believed this was over. They thought Kang's intervention had been a speed bump, an inconvenience that had unexpectedly promoted me instead of removing me, but ultimately a minor disruption. They thought I was grateful, safe, manageable. I almost smiled writing that last word in my notebook. In fact, the only thing more dangerous than being underestimated once is being underestimated twice by the same people, while you're already 3 moves ahead. I closed the notebook, and I got to work. They made their next move on a Thursday afternoon in the form of a health inspection. I knew something was off the moment I saw the inspector's badge. Not because there was anything visibly wrong with it, but because I had been managing this floor long enough to know our inspection schedule. I knew which district we fell under. I knew which inspectors were assigned to this corridor. The man standing in my kitchen that Thursday was not one of them. I watched him move through the space, polite, efficient. The kind of efficient that looks practiced, too smooth, but like someone who had done this before but not for the reasons he was pretending. I followed at a distance, clipboard in hand, nodding when he pointed at things, asking the kinds of questions a new manager asks when she's learning the ropes. He didn't know I was watching his hands. At the far end of the prep station, near a ventilation register that nobody checked more than once a month, he stopped longer than any legitimate inspector stops. He made a note on his pad. He moved on. After he left, I went back to that spot. The citation was already in the system by the time I checked. A fabricated ventilation issue that, if it held, would trigger a full license review. I photographed everything. The citation, the timestamp, my own counternotes. Then I went back to my office and pulled the public inspector's schedule for our district from the city's website. His name wasn't on it. He wasn't assigned here. He had no legitimate reason to be in this building. I wrote it all down, added it to the file. 2 days later, Keisha came to me with something that changed the temperature of everything. She told me that one of Holt's people had made contact with her, not in person, through a message passed by someone in the hotel's external maintenance crew. They were offering money for information about what I was doing, what I was looking into, whether I was talking to anyone. She had said no, and then she had come straight to me. I looked at her across the break room table and felt something I didn't let show on my face. A fierce, though specific gratitude that I couldn't afford to be sentimental about right now. "Thank you," I said. Just that. She nodded, poured her coffee. I thought about it for the rest of that day, because the approach to Keisha told me something important. They were watching me closely enough to notice that she and I had grown close. They were nervous. And nervous people start cutting corners. So I made a decision. I told Keisha exactly what to say if they contacted her again. I gave her fragments. True things, carefully chosen. Things that would paint a picture of a woman who had gotten lucky with a promotion and was doing her best not to make waves. A woman who was focused on her job, grateful to Mr. Kang, not asking too many questions. The opposite of what was actually happening. And I wanted Holt watching a version of me that didn't exist. I wanted his attention on the wrong woman entirely while the real version of me kept building. Every move they made, I documented. Every attempt to rattle me, I absorbed quietly and added to the file. They thought silence meant surrender. They were about to find out that for some people, silence is where all the real work happens. I found Elena Park at an industry networking event on a Wednesday evening in March. I hadn't been invited. I had bought a ticket under the name of the hotel, a legitimate move for a floor manager building vendor relationships. Nobody looked twice. She was exactly what I had expected. Sharp, poised, the kind of beautiful that comes from discipline rather than ease. She moved through that room like someone who had spent years being the most prepared person at every table, which, based on everything I had found, she probably had been. I introduced myself simply. Floor manager at the Maison Noire. Lovely event. Have you worked with any of the vendors here before? She shook my hand. Said yes, a few. Made a note of the hotel's name. I moved on. Let her think it was nothing. Over the next 2 weeks, I arranged 2 more coincidental moments. A coffee shop near her office that I started visiting on mornings I knew she'd be there based on a publicly listed speaking engagement nearby. A mutual acquaintance, a hospitality contact of mine who happened to know her professionally, who mentioned my name in the right conversation. By our third encounter, she was curious about me. That was what I needed. Then we had coffee. She asked about the hotel, about my role, about how I had ended up there. I answered carefully, gave her enough truth to feel like I was being open and held back everything that mattered. And then, slowly, she started talking. She told me she had worked with a group of investors on a property deal in the city. She didn't name names. She said it had become more aggressive than she had expected, that certain tactics had been used that she hadn't been fully briefed on. She wasn't confessing, she was testing me, seeing what I knew, seeing if I was safe. I kept my face open, nodded, said something sympathetic about how complex these arrangements could get. Inside, I was logging every word, because 3 days later she took a meeting with Raymond Holt. And in that meeting, in the private dining room I had quietly arranged for them through a contact in reservations, in the room where Keisha had already placed a small recording device during the table reset 2 hours prior, Elena told Holt exactly what I had allowed her to believe. That I was a woman who had stumbled into something over her head. Grateful for my position, not a threat. That I had mentioned in confidence that I was thinking about leaving the hotel in a few months anyway. She had taken everything I offered her and handed it to the man who had tried to destroy me. I listened to the recording once. I labeled the file, closed it. I wasn't angry at her. Not exactly. I had already understood who Elena Park was. A woman who had chosen the powerful side of every room she had ever been in, and would keep choosing it regardless of the cost. She hadn't betrayed me. She had just confirmed what I already knew. And in doing so, she had handed me exactly what I needed to finish this. When I finally stood my ground, when they found out exactly who they had been dealing with all along, do you know what they said? They said I was calculating, cold, that I had manipulated the whole thing. But let me ask you something. Where were they when I was standing in that dining room, hands shaking, trying not to cry in front of a room full of people who had already decided I was guilty? Where were they when I came back the next day, and the day after that, carrying all of it inside me and showing none of it on my face? If you've ever had to choose between your peace and someone else's comfort, and you chose yourself, this channel is your space. Subscribe right now. Not for me. For every person watching in silence who needed to see someone hold it together long enough to win. I spent 5 days deciding how it would fall, not whether. How. Because there's a difference between having enough to end someone and knowing the right moment to use it. I had watched powerful men survive scandals that should have finished them, not because the evidence was weak, but because the exposure was messy, too emotional, too easy to reframe. The story got lost inside the noise of the reaction. That wasn't going to happen here. I sat at my desk after close on a Tuesday night with everything I had built over the past 3 months spread out in front of me. The notebook, the printed filing records, The inspector's badge number cross-referenced against the public schedule, the recording from the private dining room, the sworn statement from the man who had actually taken the watch, a man named Dennis Pruitt, plus who I had located through a maintenance service log Keisha had pulled, and who had agreed to put everything in writing in exchange for legal protection that I had quietly arranged through an attorney in a different city who had no connection to anyone in this building. I had everything. What I needed was a room. And Raymond Holt had just given me one. His annual charity gala, a high-profile event he hosted every spring to remind the city of his civic generosity, was scheduled at the Maison Noire in 6 days. 100 guests, donors, political allies, press. The kind of room where a man's reputation either gets cemented or gets taken apart in front of everyone who matters. He had booked it here specifically because of the hotel's prestige, because of Kang's name attached to the venue. Yeah, he had no idea he had just handed me the stage. I went to Kang that same night. I laid out the full plan. Every step, every move, every contingency. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, the office was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "This is going to cost him everything." "Yes," I said. "And if anything goes wrong, nothing will go wrong," I said, "because I've been building this for 3 months and I haven't made a single move they could see." He looked at me the way he had that first night in the dining room, like he was recalibrating something. "You planned this from the beginning," he said. I didn't answer that directly, because the honest answer was complicated. I hadn't planned it from the beginning so much as I had refused to stop. I refused to let what happened to me become just another story about a woman who got humiliated and then went quiet. Refused to let Holt walk back into table 12 and look at me like I was furniture. The plan had grown out of that refusal, one careful step at a time. 5 days out, I arranged for an investigative journalist, a woman named Kara Weston, who covered city politics for a serious outlet, to receive an anonymous tip. I gave her enough to begin her own research. Enough that whatever happened at the gala, there would already be a parallel trail in motion that couldn't be stopped. 4 days out, Dennis Pruitt's notarized statement was sealed in 3 separate envelopes. 3 days out, I walked the gala floor plan myself, during setup, and identified exactly where I would stand and when. 2 days out, Holt called Kang directly, offered to dissolve the shell company, drop everything, walk away quietly. Kang looked at me across his desk. I shook my head once. He said into the phone, "No, see you at the gala." 1 day out, I pressed my black suit and went to bed early. The room was exactly what I knew it would be, white and gold, champagne moving on trays, 100 people dressed in the kind of clothes that signal belonging, that say, without saying, "I am the kind of person who gets invited to rooms like this." I had spent 5 years serving those people. Tonight, I was the one who had set the table. Holt arrived at 7:15, working the room the way he always did. Hand on a shoulder here, a laugh there, the easy confidence of a man who had never once stood in a space and felt like he didn't belong in it. But he found his position near the podium, checked the room, let himself relax. He didn't see me near the back wall. He never looked for me in rooms like this. That had always been his problem. The journalist, Kara Weston, was seated at a table near the center. She had come as herself. Her publication had a standing invitation to events like this. Her recorder was running. She had already confirmed to me, through a message I received at 6:40, that her story would go live in 48 hours regardless of tonight. Tonight was the confirmation, the undeniable room full of witnesses confirmation. At 7:30, the 3 sealed envelopes went out. I had placed them in the hands of 3 specific guests: a city planning commissioner, a senior partner at a law firm who had no connection to Holt, and a journalist from a second outlet who had also been given just enough context to understand what he was holding. Each envelope contained Dennis Pruitt's sworn, notarized statement. At 7:45, Holt stepped to the podium. He talked about civic responsibility, about integrity, about his deep commitment to this community and the people in it. He used the word trust 4 times. I counted. I waited until he was 2 minutes in. Then I turned and gave Keisha a single nod. She was at the AV station in the back corner, where she had been for the past 40 minutes, unremarkable in her hotel uniform, completely invisible to everyone in that room. The screens that had been cycling through event photography went dark for exactly 2 seconds. Then they came back up. 3 monitors. At the security footage, not the edited version from that night, but the full, extended version from every angle, including the hallway camera that no one had thought to check. The one that showed the back corridor outside the restaurant at 9:47 p.m., the night of the incident. Dennis Pruitt walking out. And 30 seconds later, Raymond Holt, visible through the glass panel of the corridor door, watching. He had been there. He had watched the whole thing. The room went silent so fast it felt physical, like the air had been pulled out. Holt's voice stopped mid-sentence. I watched his face move through the stages. Confusion first, then recognition, then the specific cold panic of a man watching the floor drop out from under him in front of everyone he had ever needed to impress. At the center table, the planning commissioner opened his envelope. The law firm partner opened his. The second journalist opened his. 3 people who mattered read Dennis Pruitt's statement simultaneously. Carl Briggs, the deputy DA who had been quietly protecting Holt for 2 years, went the color of chalk. Elena Park set her champagne glass down on a nearby table with the careful, controlled motion of someone who has just understood that every calculation they made was wrong. A hotel staff member moved through the room toward Kang's 2 associates near the exit doors. Not a scene, not a confrontation, just a quiet, professional, completely inevitable close. I walked to the front of the room. Not fast, not with any particular urgency. Holt turned and found me 5 feet away. His mouth opened. I spoke first, quietly, exactly the way he had spoken to me that night, like the words were nothing, like the room was just a room, like I had all the time in the world. I believe, I said, you are owed more than an apology. The journalist's recorder caught every word. And the room, the same kind of room where people had once turned to watch me get accused, where they had shifted in their seats and looked away and decided my discomfort was not their problem. That room went completely, absolutely still. Nobody looked away this time. I need you to stop for a second. Think about everything that led to this moment. Not just in my story, but in your own life. Every time someone dismissed you, every time a room full of people chose the powerful version of a story over the true one. Every time you swallowed something that deserved to be said out loud, sometimes the most powerful thing a person can do is wait. If this story moved you, if any piece of this felt familiar, subscribe right now. Because somewhere out there, someone is in chapter 1 of their own version of this. Still shaking, still holding it together, still trying to figure out if the fight is worth it. Your one click tells them it is. And stay. Because next is where I tell you what all of this actually cost me, and it is not what you expect. 6 weeks after the gala, Raymond Holt resigned from his council seat. The investigation was open. The shell company had been dissolved under legal pressure. The false inspector's credentials had been formally revoked. Carl Briggs quietly announced he would not seek re-election. By citing personal reasons in a statement his office released on a Friday afternoon, the classic move of a man trying to disappear into a news cycle. Marcus Webb had gone very silent. Elena Park had lost 2 clients in the weeks following the gala and had sent a legal letter to Kang's office that amounted to nothing more than a woman trying to rearrange history after it had already been written. The journalist Kara Weston's story ran on a Monday morning and was picked up by 4 other outlets by noon. By any measure, it was over, and I felt almost nothing. That surprised me, the first time I noticed it. I had expected relief, some kind of release, the thing you feel at the end of a long effort when the weight finally comes off. But what I actually felt, sitting alone in the restaurant after close on the night the story broke, was something quieter and stranger than that. Tired. Not broken, not sad, just deeply, bone-level tired in the way that comes from carrying something heavy for a long time and finally putting it down. I visited Keisha on a Thursday. She had received a promotion, a formal one, with a title and a pay adjustment, that had come through Kang's office without any announcement. She poured me tea, and we sat in her small apartment and didn't say much because we didn't need to. Some things between people don't require a lot of words. I met with Kara Weston once, off the record, a week after the story ran. She asked me one question. Were you afraid? I thought about the honest answer for a long time before I gave it. Every single day, I said. I just didn't let it be the loudest thing in the room. She nodded. Yep, wrote nothing down. Kang offered me the VP role in his hospitality group 2 weeks after the gala. A real role. Operations, oversight, strategy across multiple properties. I asked for 3 days to think about it. In those 3 days, I walked that dining room after closing. I stood in the spot where I had stood when Holt pointed at me. I looked at the same marble floors, the same chandeliers, the same careful arrangement of crystal and linen that had felt like a stage the night everything happened. It didn't feel like that anymore. It felt like mine. Not because Kang had given it to me, not because I had won something, but because I had walked through the worst version of what that room could do to a person, and I had not let it define the ending. I had stayed. I had paid attention. I had done the quiet, relentless, invisible work that powerful people never expect from the people they dismiss. I took the role, and on my first morning in it, a new waitress, young, first week, clearly terrified, fumbled a service call near a table where the guest's voice was starting to rise. I was across the room. I moved toward them without rushing, without urgency, without any of the visible signals that would announce what I was doing. I simply stepped between the guest and the waitress and said calmly, "Let me take care of this." The guest looked up, went quiet. Because there are rooms where people feel power the moment it enters, not because of anything loud or dramatic, but because of something they can't name, something settled, something that has been through something and is still standing. I know what that feeling is now. I earned it. One silent day at a time. Sometimes justice doesn't look like a courtroom. Sometimes it looks like a woman in a black suit, standing in the same room where they tried to break her, and choosing to stay. If this story stayed with you, if you watched all the way to the end, you already know why. Subscribe right now, not for the algorithm, not for a channel, for every person who is still in the middle of their own story, still holding, still building, still waiting for their moment. You are not alone. And the ending? It belongs to you.